And with service accommodation, you get the higher yields, so the better income, which is always the attraction. But it comes also with more responsibility. And it was funny, we were talking about this earlier with another guest about the regulation with buy to let. And how, let's say, 20, 25 years ago, you needed an AST and you maybe even needed a gas safety certificate. And that was a fairly recent thing, even in the last 20 years. But now there's a whole host of stuff, including kind of border controls, right to rent and the like. And then you've also got things such as Section 24, where you're getting taxed on your revenue. All of this stuff is being thrown at landlords such as yourself. How do you overcome all of that as well?
Yeah, so I guess, I mean, in a way, and I think it's part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of the reason why the serviced accommodation short let stuff has come to prominence is it actually gets, I wouldn't say gets round, it more avoids a lot of those things. So you've not got right to rent checks because it's no different from a hotel. You avoid Section 24 because it doesn't apply to furnished holiday lettings, which from a taxation point of view, it's what it fits into. So, I'm not saying you can sort of fly by the seat of your pants in serviced accommodation, but it doesn't have all those regulatory things necessarily, or in the same way that AST letting has. Having said that, it is a trading business, and I think a lot of people, I see people on Facebook who say, "Oh, I've got one property, the tenant's just left. I'm thinking of putting it on Airbnb," and it really, really is not as simple as that. You might have, we have a minimum of 2 night stays, so you could have 3 or 4 changeovers in a week.
Yeah.
That's not something you can realistically do with one property. Now, you might completely outsource it and get someone to manage it, and that's fine. But in terms of trying to run that yourself, I mean, we do self-manage those, but we've got 18 units and we've got a much larger portfolio. So we've got people who are managing the whole portfolio. So part of their time is dedicated to managing the serviced accommodation, the short let stuff. We outsource the linen. We use a linen company. We outsource the cleaning to a cleaning company. Okay, we tell them when they need to turn up and what needs to be done. But there are elements of it outsourced. But we've got sufficient scale, I think, both within our short let business and the wider business to justify that overhead. And I always say to people within serviced accommodation, unless you're going to have 10 units from a self-management point of view, don't bother. It's not worth the hassle, to be honest. I don't think.
Yeah, no, I happen to agree with you. And the new use class, have you heard of this?
Yes,
C5.
Yeah, absolutely, and sort of hesitate to take any credit for it, but for the last X number of years, I've been saying that I thought that if they wanted to regulate, then that was the way to do it. It's exactly what they did with the C4 HMOs. And indeed, this happened 6-7 months ago in Wales. In Wales, in fact, they now have a C5 and a C6, and I can't remember off the top of my head. There's a slight difference between them. So they're both short-let type categories.
Oh, right. They've actually got that in Wales. I didn't know that.
Yeah. As I say, I think it was October that came in Wales, and Scotland are bringing in licensing. So actually, Scotland and Wales are ahead of England in terms of the regulation of short-term lets. For a long time now, it's been regulated in London. In fact, from 1974, and I think called the Greater London General Powers Act 1974, said any let of under 90 days in London required planning permission. Now, what happened when we came around to the Olympics in 2012, which was spitting distance from where we're sat, a lot of people said, well, isn't this ridiculous? We're a major city and we can't let our properties out to people coming for the Olympics without, in theory, needing planning permission. Having said that, if someone lets their property out for 2 or 3 weeks, by the time the planning authorities catch up with that, it's long since gone. But I think it did cause the regulatory authorities to have a look at that. And so in 2015, the Deregulation Act, what they said was, okay, short lets are anything under 90 days, but you can have a number of those up to 90 days total in any one calendar year without the need for planning permission. So people talk about the 90-day rule in London. Actually, it's almost a 90-day allowance, if you like. In other words, pre-2015, you couldn't do it at all in London.
Okay.
So since 2015, you've been allowed to do 90 days. Now, that's purely in Greater London, so that regulation has been there, so for all of that time. Since then, Scotland is now becoming more regulated. Wales has become more regulated, and now in England they've put out 2 consultation papers. One, as you say, about creating a separate use class, which is C5 for short lets, and there's debate about how that should be defined. And the other is about licensing. Now, on the planning front, what they're proposing, which, as I said, exactly the same with C4, is that when they bring the C5 use class in, and as I say, it's a consultation paper, and I think it's really important to understand, because a lot of people have jumped up and down and said, oh, you now need this, that, and the other. No, it's a consultation. They've not even published a bill yet or anything like that. But one of the proposals, and this is what they've got in Wales, is that normal residential dwelling is C3. And what they're proposing is that you can move from C3 to C5, which is short let, or will be, and back again as permitted development. So you won't need planning permission to do that normally. It's exactly the same as C3 and C4 small HMOs, which are 3 to 6 occupiers. But in areas where the council want to be able to control short lets, and quite frankly, Cornwall would be an obvious example, where there's a lot of pressure, and some city centres, the local authorities will be able to propose an Article 4 direction that removes that permitted development right to go from C3 to C5. They probably won't remove the right to come back again, and that's the same with HMOs. Again, where there are Article 4 directions, most of them stop C3 to C4, but they don't stop C4 to C3. But then once you've done that, you can't go back again. So that's, as I say, there's multiple options in the consultation paper, but that's broadly what they've done in Wales. And I've said, people have talked about, is regulation going to come in? And I've said for some time I thought that was a neat way of doing it. The good thing is, and again, something people seem to have sort of missed the point of, is that if you're already doing short lets, at the point when that law comes in, C5 will be your lawful use, and exactly the same as C4. And if then an Article 4 direction comes in, as long as you're doing that short let within the definition of C5, you've got what are broadly termed grandfather rights. So it's not suddenly going to be the case that everybody now doing short lets is suddenly going to have to apply for planning permission, because they've already secured that lawful use. What it will cap in the areas of high pressure where they bring in an Article 4 direction, it will mean that if you want to do short lets, you'll need planning permission, which obviously will control it. And I think the licensing thing is exactly the same with HMO licensing, is really, and I don't mean to diminish it, but it's a tick box exercise in the sense that, in order to get a license, you need to do the following things. It's not a case, whereas planning is subjective, local authorities say, no, in broad terms, we don't like the look of that, so we'll not allow it. With licensing, if you meet, if you meet the terms of the licensing, you will get a license exactly the same as HMO. They can't refuse an HMO license for a planning permitted HMO on the basis that they don't want it to be an HMO if you've ticked all the boxes.
And it will restrict the supply as well at some point, especially if the Article 4 does come in. So if you can get in now and you've got a few good units that are doing well, that restriction supply should hopefully guarantee your future success as well, which is, again, it goes back to what's happened with HMOs. And I think that it's definitely got legs.